Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to contribute to this debate, and I pay tribute to the member for Dagenham for securing this important debate. I am a great admirer of him, of his work and of his worldview, which I find I largely share. I think of him as a great conservative, despite what he just said. And I'm very pleased to be working with him on the Onward panel. And I join him in endorsing the report that's being published tomorrow and congratulate the team that have put it together. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a topical and important debate, not just because what we call social fabric is a nice to have that everybody agrees with. We all like village halls and girl guides and so on. This agenda is profoundly important to the future of our country, partly for the very obvious reason that what people want, above all else, is strong communities. We derive huge value personally from the strength of our neighbourhoods. But more profoundly, this debate matters because what we call social fabric is in fact the foundation of our prosperity. The House just spent the afternoon debating global Britain. I'm not sure this topic was really discussed, but in fact, the source of our prosperity as a country and indeed our offer to the world is in our local communities. We became the world's first industrial power because we had a culture that enables cooperation, shared values, and the moral sentiments that underpin free markets. These are only possible because people trust each other. So the country is made up of the communities within it, and our responsibility as politicians, I think, is to strengthen our communities and strengthen the foundations of our national prosperity. The member for Dagenham spoke about his constituency in East London, obviously quite a different place from Devizes. He said it began in 1921. We trace our origins to 4000 BC, when the first prehistoric Neolithic structures were erected in my bit of Wiltshire. But actually there are many similarities. We too have entrenched social challenges. Rural poverty and social isolation are particularly vicious because they're often hidden. But we also, like in Dagenham, we have tremendous organisations and a very strong community which is responding to these challenges. Pay particular tribute to Community First and to the Wiltshire Community Foundation that I'm privileged to work with. This is a place where people take responsibility for themselves and for their neighbours. And we're seeing it now in the rush to get people vaccinated. On Friday, I spoke to 3 family businesses, long-established businesses in the constituency, T.H. White, agricultural engineers, Gagers, builders, and the brewers, Wadworth, all 3 suffering naturally as businesses are during this crisis, but all volunteered to help put the word out among their workers, and in some cases pay their employees to help drive people to vaccination centres in the weeks and months ahead. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, while we need to trust in the spontaneous energies of communities, as I've been describing, we also need to recognise that this sort of activity doesn't just happen. And if we want more of it, especially in more disadvantaged places, we do need to take action, and government has a responsibility here. And let us just recognise what has happened over recent decades. The fact is, as the Onward research demonstrates, our social fabric has grown threadbare over recent decades. Across the country since 2000, a quarter of all pubs have closed, a quarter of all post offices, and a fifth of all libraries have shut their doors. Now, partly this is because of the way that we all now work and shop and socialise, just changes in our economy and our society. And partly it's because of funding cuts, especially since 2010, and I want to acknowledge that. I recognise that austerity fell most harshly on local government, who then cut non-statutory services the most. And youth services, an area that I worked in during those years, fell away particularly sharply. Some estimates suggest 70% of funding for youth services was cut in the 2010s. So what do we do? Well, we do need more public funding. And I particularly welcome the investments that the government has made, hundreds of millions of pounds committed to youth services. During the pandemic, the first lockdown last year, 750 million in emergency funding for civil society and for charities. And I pay tribute to all the work that the Minister for Civil Society is doing and ministers at DCMS to support the charity sector. And of course, I'd welcome more funding. And I've called very specifically for a new endowment funded from dormant assets, which are worth many billions of pounds potentially, to finance social infrastructure and community projects. I also hope the new Levelling Up Fund that was announced by my Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor, at the Spending Review in November, will live up to its billing and fund what's called the infrastructure of everyday life, which means, in my view, not just trains and broadband, vital as those things are, but also the libraries and youth clubs and social enterprises that bind places together. And in fact, broadband is a big part of social fabric. I hope we can do a deal with tech firms to get our communities properly connected. And I see a major role for libraries in particular as the hubs of digitally connected local communities. And finally, on money, I welcome the Kickstart scheme the government's announced, and along with Onward and other colleagues, I hope we can adapt that scheme, perhaps combining it with the National Citizen Service, to create a more ambitious project that funds young people, especially those who have suffered with all the disruption to education during this crisis, and those who will suffer from the downturn in the labour market in the months ahead. We need to fund those young people to work on social and environmental projects in their communities. But Madam Deputy Speaker, to finish, whatever we do with public money, there is something more important than that we need to get right. And that is the question of power. Who is making the decisions about how money is spent and how services are organised locally? We are one of the most centralised countries in the developed world. And to my mind, taking back control wasn't just about Brussels. If all we do now is bring power back to Westminster, as we have done, we will have failed the people of this country. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is why I think the social fabric agenda is so significant, because we need to put the power to determine what happens locally in the hands of local people. And the Onward report makes a number of recommendations along these lines, and I made some in my report last year. We are in the midst of a great constitutional change, the restoration of power to the UK. We need to restore power to communities too. I welcome this debate. I thank my honourable friends, I shall call him, for Dagenham, for what he called this cross-party conversation. I hope we can go beyond that. The battle for politics should be over this agenda. We should be fighting in this place about who owns the community agenda. And I think that my party has a very good claim to that. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.